We just sang, Ki anu amecha ve'ata Eloheinu. We are your people, and you are our God. But one could be forgiven for not believing in God. War in Israel, with threats from the north and the south, citizens displaced and rockets still falling, hostages still held deep underground, unbearable suffering and violence in Ukraine and Sudan, devastating hurricanes in North Carolina and Florida, more than 44 million people in the United States struggling to put food on the table, nearly 1 million of them, including 260,000 children, hungry in New Jersey. How could there be a God? How could a being by that name permit such things? Science, mathematics, research, and reason. What evidence is there for God? And if there were a God, wouldn't the world be a better place? In a recent conversation, a colleague commented on a friend's habit of saying, Baruch Hashem, may God be blessed, no matter the circumstance. My colleague's response was, after October 7th, how can you say Baruch Hashem to anything anymore? But I don't believe in that kind of God. I believe in the kind of God who created this world and sustains all life, who gives human beings free will and the opportunity to grow and change, and yes, also the power to hurt each other. I believe in the kind of God that strengthens us in moments of crisis, nurtures our sense of resilience, and is evident in our relationships, our actions, and our deepest commitments. Despite all the suffering in this world, I still believe in God. This phenomenon, this feeling that God is absent, negligent, or perhaps never even existed in the first place, is not new. Since the 19th century, philosophers and theologians have spoken of the death of God. However, it must be stressed, wrote Richard Rubinstein, that the death of God is not something that has happened to God. It is a cultural event experienced by men and women, many of whom remain faithful members of their religious communities. They are no longer able to believe in a transcendent God who is sovereign over human history and who rewards and punishes men and women according to their deserts. The death of God is not about God's death at all. It is about the death of one particular idea of God. I reject the notion that God rewards the righteous and punishes the wicked because I've seen too many good people suffer. And I see, too, the evil in the world which seems to go unpunished. I reject a redeeming God who acts in history and who will save humanity from its vicissitudes. But I do not reject God. Full stop. The God of history, the God of reward and punishment, does show up in the Hebrew Bible and in our High Holy Day liturgy. I wish that God would show up today. It is difficult, painful even, to reject that kind of God, to realize that human free will and God's remove mean that God isn't coming to fix all of our problems, that good people will suffer, that evil will go unpunished, that war and hunger and cancer won't be wiped away by God's mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Experiencing God's conspicuous absence in the face of these realities is tragic. And yet, God is still a powerful presence in my life, and I believe in the world. This God shows up in our liturgy as well. Avinu Malkeinu kotvenu b'sefer chayim tovim. Avinu Malkeinu, enter our names in the book of lives well lived. Give us the courage, God, to make the kinds of choices that will help us live our lives more fully. Guide our actions and show us the right path, grounded in the teachings of the Torah and the wisdom of our tradition. Avinu Malkeinu chadesh aleinu shana tova. Avinu Malkeinu, renew and sustain us for a year of goodness. God, give us strength and be with us as this new year begins. Help us to hold on to what is good, even as we work to change and grow and improve ourselves, even as we work to repair all that is broken in this world. Remind us of that which is still whole, still true, and still good. Help us to hold fast to hope and possibility and not give in to despair. Remind us of your power to create in goodness each new day. This is the God of human agency and potential, of values and ethics, mitzvot, and right action. The God of strength and resilience no matter what the year brings. The God of goodness who renews the ongoing act of creation, sustaining life each and every day. Rabbi Rubenstein offers another model. I believe there is a conception of God which does not falsify or mystify reality, he wrote. In this conception, God is spoken of as the holy nothingness. God is no thing. God transcends all the known universe. God is the basis for everything that we know. How do we understand God in a world of suffering? Rubenstein proposes a reorientation of our expectations for how God works in the world, and a subsequent shift in the language we use to describe God's actions. He continues, as ground and source, God creates as does a mother, in and through her very substance. As ground of being, God participates in all the joys and sorrows of the drama of creation, which is at the same time the deepest expression of divine life. The world of the death of the biblical God need not be a place of gloom and despair. One need not live forever for life to be worth living. Creation, however impermanent, is full of promise. God may not be directing history, but God is still present in the world, still with us in the joys and sorrows of our lives. God is the life force that animates the world and also the limits that constrain those forces, namely death, which is an inextricable part of life. God as giver of human potential, standard bearer for ethical behavior, and source of strength and resilience. God as creator and animator of the universe. Another way of understanding God is as silent teacher. In a recent article for the Reformed Jewish Quarterly, my teacher, Dr. Alyssa Gray, a scholar of rabbinic literature, turns to the Talmud in search of theology and a theological renewal for dark times. In a lengthy and rich sequence in Tractate Chagiga, she writes, the rabbis grapple with the theological consequences of living in a godless world. The Talmudic story is centered around the mitzvah of appearing at the ancient temple in Jerusalem, derived from the verse in Exodus which instructs 3 occasions in the year, all your males will appear before Adonai your God. By the time the rabbis of the Talmud are discussing this verse, however, the temple has already been destroyed. Rav Huna, upon reading the command to appear before God, recognizes that it is no longer possible to do so and begins to cry. He reads another verse, this time related to the mitzvah of bringing an offering before God, and again he weeps. Rabbi Elazar cries too as he reads a verse from the Torah about not hearing a response from a loved one. And then Rabbi Ami does the same, crying over a verse that ends, "Perhaps there may be hope." Perhaps? Rabbi Ami asks incredulously. After all that is expected of us, after all that we have suffered, only perhaps there is hope. Sage after sage reads a verse of Torah and breaks down in tears. Later in this same passage, God too is weeping. Rav Shmuel Bar Inya said, in the name of Rav, the Holy One, blessed be God, has a certain place where God cries. And the Gemara states there are 3 types of people for whom God cries every single day. Following the rabbis weeping over verses and God's own anguish and tears, the text concludes with a human-centered story of traveling scholars. Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi and Rabbi Chia arrive at a certain town and ask, "Is there a Torah scholar here with whom we can study?" And the people of the city answer, "There is a Torah scholar here, but he is blind." And so together they went and greeted the blind scholar. When they were leaving, he said to them, "You greeted one who is seen and does not see. May you be worthy to greet the one who sees and is not seen." The text continues with the travels of other scholars who learned from each other in and outside of the Beit Midrash, the house of study. Going to and fro, scenes deliberately evocative of the Mishnah's description of Jewish men making pilgrimages once upon a time at the Jerusalem temple. This is a solution to what the rabbis see as the historical and theological crisis of their world, writes Gray. A crisis in which they live without the ready access to God that the temple provided. They quietly keep calm and carry on, performing mitzvot, studying Torah, and keeping faith in a God who suffers God's own anguish over their crisis. Theirs is a quiet optimism of faithful persistence, a nurturing of a relationship with a bafflingly silent God, and a conviction of being part of a continuous relationship that persists despite the inevitable oscillations of Jewish triumph and tragedy. God may not be directing history or preventing the catastrophic events in the world or in our lives, and yet I still have faith. I still believe, as our ancestors did, in this bafflingly silent God. This God who watches with horror at what we do to each other, who weeps at our failure to live up to the standards established in the Torah. I still believe God is present as the ground and source of all being, even without evidence, even if God remains unseen. I believe in the God who cries with us during times of crisis and offers us a path forward through Torah and mitzvot, study and prayer, relationship and community. I believe in the God who persists with a people who persists, despite the inevitable oscillations of Jewish triumph and tragedy. I believe in the God of Israel, Avinu Malkeinu Adonai Eloheinu. I still believe in God. Baruch Hashem.